Welcome back to another episode of The Summer of Me. Today we are talking about what to do when you really don't know what to do. This episode is called, Can Somebody Please Just Tell Me What to Do? And I lived in this space for an embarrassing amount of time, honestly. And sometimes I still do. And I think this is a very common thought that we all have is like, I don't want to make this decision. I don't want to have to think through this. And I would just really honestly like somebody to just tell me what to do. I would love to conclude this message by saying that's never going to happen. So let's talk about it. We're going to talk about the cliff concept first. And I talked about this on the last episode, but I want to dive into it a little bit further. If you are in a marriage or a relationship and you start to feel things adding up, I want you to visualize a cliff, like full Grand Canyon style, like cliff. And you're starting like your marriage and you're in the middle of like the meadow and like everything is grand and everything is great. And the goal is that you stay there. I'm ad-libbing here, so bear with me on the parallels. But the goal is that you're kind of like staying in this field and like things are good. And you may like kind of like take some walks and like vacillate a little bit. Again, the pendulum swing. But the goal is that you are like staying in the middle of this mountaintop. And what happened in my marriage, and I know so many other people that experience the same thing, is I feel like there were moments and situations and little tiny things, steps, if you will, that pushed me closer and closer and closer to the edge of this cliff. And I don't know if you've ever fallen off a cliff, probably not if you're listening to this, but if you have, let us know. But if you fall off a cliff or you get pushed off a cliff or you step off a cliff, you don't usually come back. My experience in my marriage was there was all these little tiny events and nothing was bad. Nothing was like monumental or astronomical or dangerous or like there was no drinking. There was no cheating. There was no big event that really said like, okay, this marriage is over. But for me, it was all these little tiny moments and steps and situations that pushed me to the end of this cliff, basically. And I was like, I don't know how I get back to the meadow. I don't know how I get back to the middle of the mountaintop. I am hanging by a thread. My hand is like barely hanging on. If you've ever rock climbed, you know, like it's all on the fingertips, baby. And which I clearly have nails. I can't rock climb to save my life, but you're gripping on for dear life. And I truly felt like I was hanging by a thread for so long and was just like on the edge of that cliff. And I was like, I just want somebody to tell me what to do. Do I muscle my way back up? Do I climb back up? Do I stay on the top of the mountain even though it's awful and I'm sad and I'm lonely and I'm depressed and I'm anxious? Or do I stand on the edge of this cliff and do I like let those little tiny things finally push me off the edge? So basically what happened in my marriage was I got to the edge of the cliff and a combination of getting pushed off the cliff and simply jumping. I guess you could say I jumped without a parachute. I hit a point of no return, but it took me a long time to get to that place. And there was so much ambivalence in the process. It's a mind fuck. It really is like, do I go? Do I stay? Is this worth it? Do I put the time in? Do I put the energy in? And then you put the time and the energy in and you do all those things and it's still not worth it. And you're just, you vacillate, you go back and forth and it becomes this massive growth in your body. And this just like, you can't ignore it. Everything is like, well, if I stayed, what would this situation look like? If I go, what would this situation look like? How are my kids going to fare? All this. So I just kind of want to talk about that process and how it was for me at least. How I know because I hear from you guys all the time, how it feels for so many of you guys. A couple things that like monumental moments, and these are like sometimes laughable when you kind of look back at them. And again, like they're never going to feel like, oh, that's why I left this marriage or whatever. But it's all of these little things for years, like they add up and then it's going to be a cheeseburger that like throws you over the edge and you're like, I'm done. Actually, I fell off the cliff. I'm done. And there's no going back. A couple things for me. So I will never forget, I had a really hard time prioritizing myself. I didn't set that expectation in my marriage from the very get-go. And so my spouse also had a hard time prioritizing me. There was not a lot of room for me. And as I went through the summer of me and through this process of kind of allowing myself to be human and to have needs and to exist for more than like the purpose of serving the people in my life, I started to experience like things that I enjoy and things that I like to do, and I would do them, which is half the battle, right? We can say, oh, I like to do this, but are you actually going to take the time and do it and indulge yourself and honor your needs? And I will never forget, we had moved to Nashville and I was sitting, I had two chairs in the corner of my living room. I had a fireplace in the middle and there was a chair on each side. And these were like such cushy, lovely chairs. And I spent a lot of time in one of these chairs in particular. The kids would go to bed and I would sit in that chair. And prior to this, like before moving, like the only time I would ever sit, before the summer of me really, I guess, the only time that I would really ever sit was to nurse kids. And that sounds crazy, but like our life, like I was rocking a baby, putting a baby to sleep, nursing, like beyond that, you're running a million miles an hour. You're, cooking, cleaning, working, doing stuff around the house, entertaining kids, whatever. And I never really found myself sitting. And I remember as a kid thinking like, gosh, when my mom was that way. My mom still is. We call her Nitro Nana. The woman operates like Sonic the Hedgehog. She 100 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. She's gotten better like as time has gone on. She would kill me if I said as she's gotten older. She's gotten better as time has gone on. But I remember as a kid being like, I just wish my mom would sit on the couch with us and just be like, back then there wasn't like people had like iPhones or like portable technology, but I just like my mom, let me tell you this. That bitch had the longest phone cord you could buy. Like that shit was wrapped around freaking pillars in the dining room. It went to the table. It went to the dining nook. It went to the stove. That phone cord was the MVP of my childhood. It really did the most. But my mom was never still and she never just relaxed. And I hated it for her because I felt like she was busy, but I also hated it for us because I felt like there was no, it was the glorification of busy. And my mom would sit here and tell you that to this day. Like she didn't know how to relax and rest. And my example of like a woman in my house was somebody who does it all, who serves everybody, who absolutely attacks like life and is like the go-getter. And so fast forward to this summer of me and I was like, holy shit, I'm my mom. And I used to hate that as a child. And so one of the things I really was trying to be intentional about was like sitting in my chair, whether it was on my phone, like reading. And in this particular day, I had started reading this book. Ironically, the book was called The Idea of You. And it was like, it was my first smut book. And I was like, what world, what vault have I just opened? So anyways, I'm reading this book in this chair and my husband at the time comes in and he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm reading. And he's like, are you sick? Do you not feel good? Like, what's wrong? And I was like, no, I'm just like, I'm just enjoying this book. And he's like, wow, like must be really good or something. And I was like, yeah, it's great. Like I actually really like it. It's steamy as fuck. He like kind of was like badgering me about reading this book. And it wasn't even the content of the book. It was just like, why are you sitting? And he like looked at me and he's like, so are we having dinner tonight? And it was like, I swear like that one foot dropped off of the cliff at that point. I was like, I don't know. Are we having dinner tonight? And I just was like, holy shit. This is not the place or space that I'm allowed to relax and enjoy this book. And meanwhile, this guy has gone on and played like, every rec sport you could possibly play and traveled and lived his best life, done everything, like done all these things. And part of that was because I enabled that relationship. And part of it was like, I didn't have somebody that was comfortable honoring like, the space and the time that I needed. And I didn't ask for it. I didn't know how to ask for it. And I didn't even know that I wanted it at that time, but I was slowly morphing into this person. And so that was the first thing. The second thing that I can like really pinpoint was the cheeseburger story, which I told in a prior episode, but the gist of it was that I was really sick and I asked for a cheeseburger and asked for it to be like done a specific way and it wasn't. And when he brought it back, I was just like livid. It clicked something in me that like, you don't know who I am. You don't know what I like. You don't know like the simplest things about me. And to me, that's love, is like knowing the small intricacies of somebody. And I sat up from my illness out of my deathbed and I was like, fuck you. Take your goddamn cheeseburger and get the hell out of here. And I was so upset because it was like, that was the moment for me, like the other shoe dropped where it was like, I don't deserve this. I deserve better purely because I am a human. You get all of those rights. You get to do all of those things. You get to exist. Why don't I? And I was like, it like woke something up in me and I was like, oh my God, like I almost felt bad for myself in that moment of like, I have lived for the past 15 years literally dying death to myself to serve everybody else. And so those are the things that pushed me over the edge to where I felt like I had an epiphany or like a moment in which I remember like feeling like, okay, something's got to change. Like this is not going to work for me. But the in-between of those things, the in-between from the summer of me to the cheeseburger, do we need merch with cheeseburgers on it? The in-between of those things was a wild journey of just like trusting myself, feeling out what I wanted to do. Do I honor this marriage or do I honor myself? And they don't get to coexist in my situation. They did not coexist. That was a fact for me. And so it was, what do I do? Do I choose everybody else and the thing that is right and what everybody else wants to do? Or do I choose myself and die? And like, this is it. This is my funeral. Like, I don't get to be what I want to be, who I want to be, how I want to be. I don't get to just exist as a human who has rights to just enjoy things or experience things or feel things. And it's without question 100% the hardest decision that I've ever had to make. And I just was like, I just really want somebody to make this decision for me. Like I will pay a hitman to just like, if you had like a decision-making hitman where I was like, I will pay you to just make this decision for me under the table as much as you want. They don't exist, but there is a job opportunity there for somebody if they want it. I'm going to dive into a little bit of some of the things that kind of led me to make this decision. But before I do that, I want to say that I believe that there are things that you can try and attempt to communicate in a marriage to avoid getting to the edge of the cliff. And some of these things I did, some of them I didn't. I learned a lot in this experience. I think everybody does. And if I could go back and change one thing, it would be to be much braver with my communication. It's so scary to share like, this doesn't feel good. I need support. I need a break. I need to have some fun. I don't feel connected. I need some connection. I need a girls' night out. Those things are vulnerable to ask for when that's not the dynamic, when that's not your norm. I need a night at a hotel by myself to just like zone out and like think and like hear my own thoughts. Never one time did I ask for that. Would it have benefited me? Greatly, like very greatly. I think knowing like the things that you need, and that takes like a lot of internal work to kind of ask yourself, what do I want? Who am I? What do I need? And then being able to actually communicate them can save a marriage. And we don't want to be an inconvenience and we don't want to be a bother and we don't want to, put somebody out. But like, what's really putting somebody out is divorce. I will tell you, like, I wish that I would have really like put my foot down. There are topics in our marriage that I really put my foot down and that didn't get addressed, and they directly correlate to the reasons that we got a divorce. But there are also things that like I didn't address and I didn't communicate because I was afraid. I was afraid that somebody wasn't going to choose me. I was looking at past situations and saying like, well, this is probably what's going to happen with this, or it's not worth it, or I'm not worth it. And if I could encourage you, if you're in a marriage and you're in this situation, I really would encourage you to just go balls deep in communicating and just be like, I need this. I need a girls' night out. I feel unseen. I feel unheard. I want to tell you about my day and feel like you care. I want to go on a date with you and feel like you're present and not on your phone working. I want to go on a girls' night out so that I can spend some time with my friends and talk, with them or whatever. Like it's really, really important that you are concrete and clear in communicating those things so that when you do, or whether you do or don't end up getting a divorce, or whether you stay with that person, I trusted myself. I honored myself and my needs, and I communicated this with the person who I'm in a relationship with. And I think that can go a really long way. And it also breeds a lot of clarity, because if it doesn't go a really long way, and if it doesn't change, and if it doesn't do anything, you've tried, you've communicated, and it gives you the empathy for yourself and the certainty that like, I have communicated these things. I think the other part when you are communicating those things is writing them down. We'll talk about this in a second, but we have a a strong tendency to talk ourselves out of things or say like, well, maybe I haven't said it enough, or maybe I haven't communicated that. I can assure you, like if you're starting to gaslight yourself into thinking that you haven't communicated that, it's likely a bigger problem. Number one. But number two, if you write stuff down and you say like, okay, dear diary, today that I talked to Sebastian about needing this. And like 6 months down the road, if you're still talking and you still haven't gotten those needs met, it's a pretty good indicator that our friend Sebastian's not going to really change. Hold on though. That is the worst name of all time. I could have done better, you guys. I'm sorry. In these situations where you're feeling like your needs are not being met, one of the other mistakes that I made that I really think could have changed things, I relied on my parents and my family instead of my spouse. And it gave him a lot of free hall passes. It gave me the ability to enable his behavior because I didn't rely on him and I didn't require anything from him. And of course, like your parents are going to be happy to help, or whoever is that person in your life that's like your right-hand man. Like if it's not your spouse, that's a red flag. That is a problem. So I really, really, really encourage you to think about that. If there's needs that you have tried to address and they're not getting met, try a different route, whether that's, hey, I think we need to go to therapy. I think we need to talk to somebody that like can help us navigate kind of some of this because I feel like I've communicated this and it's falling on deaf ears or it's not happening. Try writing a note to that person. Everybody communicates differently. And I think it's really powerful when we can meet that person where they are and vice versa. And so attempting to kind of cross all of those things off of your list and say like, all right, I've tried this and I've tried this and and if none of those things work, I think sounding the alarms is kind of, for me at least, it was my last ditch effort. Like I remember sitting in those 2 chairs, ironically, and I say all the time, and I have it written in my like journal all over the place. My life ended and began in those chairs. But we sat in those same 2 chairs, and I remember looking at my husband at the time and being like, "This is it. This is not working for me. I feel done. I feel like I have no will to make this work any longer." And sounding the alarms, because I think it's easy to be like, I need this or I need that, and like people ignore it. But like the minute you drop like the D word and say like this is no longer going to work. I'm thinking about divorce because you're saying this, or I guess separation. Like I didn't really say like I want a divorce. I just was like I need some space. I need to separate. Like we need a separation because this is not working for me. Like this, you're not meeting my needs, and I feel like my the decision I'm having to make is between me and our marriage, and I don't know which one to choose at the end of the day. And I think like really letting your spouse know, your person know, like I'm at low point. Like in the words of Kate Winslet in The Holiday, she's like, low point. You're at your low point, because until you address that and you're again, really hurtful, really honest, really vulnerable, and saying like, this is where I'm at, shit's not going to probably change if it's already hasn't changed. So that's kind of the last stitch effort that I attempted and made to kind of see if something would change. Those things are really scary to say, but they're worthwhile if you want to attempt to save your marriage. As far as kind of making that decision, do I choose me? Do I choose my marriage? Do I choose to try to put everything into this and like try again and see if it's going to work? And I think it's always a matter of like, well, what about my kids? What about my finances, right? There's so many variables in this situation, and I could never pretend to know all of them because I understand like every situation is uniquely complex. I think that the process of figuring out what to do, can somebody please tell me what to do and help me make this decision? Do I stay or do I go? It's nobody else's to tell you. And ultimately, like we really have to lean into what we're feeling, what we're going through. One of the things, and I mentioned this earlier in the episode, is like the tendency to gaslight ourselves. I'm being dramatic. I'm asking too much. Do I really need these things? Am I being a bitch? Am I like being unrealistic? Do I have unrealistic expectations? Is this just the season of life we're in? Is he really that bad? All of these questions spiraled through my brain all day long, because making this decision is ultimately choosing yourself and your happiness and your sanity, if that's what the situation boils down to. And that is like the most uncomfortable thing, to choose ourselves. It is nauseating. It is like, I'd actually rather die. Most of the time, like in those situations, I was like, I got so depressed because I was like, I would rather die than have to choose this decision for me, even like, because I know it's going to blow up my entire life. It's going to blow up my kid's life. It's going to blow up my husband's life. It's going to blow up my financial life, my friendships, everything in my life. But then you're stuck with this decision of like, well, so do I just live in my life and be unhappy? Or do I choose to, honor myself and choose the path of most resistance, which it certainly is. But if you start to like go through that process of doubting yourself, you start to spiral, because then it's like you can't trust anything that you're thinking. Well, this was concrete information or evidence, and now you're spiraling because you're like, well, was it? Did he actually say that? Did I make that up? And like one thing that I really tried to avoid was gaslighting myself. And I had close people in my life that I had shared intimate details with that I backchecked myself. Basically, I was like, am I crazy? Am I like, am I in the wrong? Am I, and the people that genuinely care and know your story and know your situation will tell you, because there are times you're going to do that to yourself and there's times that you're not. And so it's really, really important to be able to have people in your life to support you and say, no, like, I don't think that like you're spot on that. Or like, no, absolutely. You've communicated this to him. I was there. You told me this, like, whatever. And to be able to kind of seek clarity in those moments of confusion. So some of the things that helped me in this process of deciding was spending time alone. And I know that that's like really not the one thing you want to do, because you're like, holy shit, I literally cannot be alone with my thoughts. I'm going to eat my own brain. Like, this sounds like the most daunting thing ever. And spending time alone was just like, it gave me time and space to think. Meditating, weirdly, like, it was like I was able to like enter into my subconscious when I meditated, and that really, really, really helped me. You guys know, you're probably so sick of me saying this, but like journaling and doing therapy and really getting down to like, why am I feeling this way? Is this something that can change? Is this something that I'm willing to like deal with? And like just processing all of that. And there's a balance. You don't want to over process to where it's like you're not trusting yourself and you're like your instinct, because at the end of the day, like, we have that fire in us and we have that like that knowing. Women's intuition is so strong. And if you are at that place where you're like, I know I gotta go, like, I know I gotta go, it might take you might know that right now, and it might take you 6 months or a year or whatever to actually go. But like, guaranteed, like, if you have that deep knowing, like, it's going to be the same result, even though you're going to have to go through trudge through like the whole journey to get to that place to actually trusting yourself. But it's like reaching that deep part of you that like knows what you need to do, whether it's to stay or to go. I spent a lot of time humming and hawing. I gave it the old college try. We separated and we dated for a while. I mean, I really was like, I am not going down easy, but I'm also like, I have too much pride to just like walk away from something that I think, still has a chance. And so I gave it like so many chances, so many opportunities. And I think that that's what I needed for that clarity, was like really saying like, all right, I gave it my all. I weighed pros and cons about kids, life, money, every living situation you could possibly think of, and really tried to think like, what's the best case scenario? And here's what I want to tell you. There is no best case scenario. If you get to this point in your relationship, you have to know that like the way out is through, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be treacherous. If you're staying and communicating all those things and working through that, it's grueling and it's hard work and it's painful, and you have to choose to let go of a lot and unsee a lot and forget a lot. If you're choosing to go, obviously the journey of like separation and divorce is hard and expensive and traumatic and all those things. So great news for you. You're fucked. Not really, but like, I think I really wanted somebody to be honest with me in this experience and to know that like there is a way out, and there's a lot of ways out, honestly, but you have to go through to get out. At the end of the day, only you know what you need to do. A couple other questions that I asked myself: do I want to be with this person when I'm 90? I had friends that were like, oh yeah, you're like going through a midlife crisis, or you're going through something, but like you want to grow old, and I'm like, I actually don't. Like, this is not what I want. I didn't sign up. I did sign up for this. I do. That's called signing up. But I didn't really know what I was signing up for at the time. Another question is this somebody that I can live with or I can't live without? Those two questions for me were like, let me think about that. Actually, I don't know. I got to think about it. And obviously, like where I landed, I can live without this person, and I don't want to be with them when I'm 90. Have I given this the time and space that it needs? And am I in this with my heart, or am I just in this with my body? Am I just existing as this person because I think that's what I should do? Or am I in this with my entire heart because I want to be here and I believe in this process? But little like questions like that, little moments where you're like of clarity really bring you closer and closer to kind of helping yourself understand like, what do I need to do? The weight of having to make that decision when you've had an entire marriage of hard decisions, especially like if it's, coming to a head at like towards the end of your marriage and you're making all these hard decisions, the weight of having to make that decision in and of itself is so traumatic and painful. And I think the most important thing that you can remind yourself is like, you don't have to know. My therapist told me this. She said, there's power in I don't know. And all I wanted was to know. I made lists. I asked Google. I fucking asked Siri, like, Siri, do you leave a divorce or do you leave a marriage if you are unhappy, but your spouse is a decent person? Siri's like, bitch, you're on your own on this one. I wanted answers because it was so terrifying to choose myself. And I think that that's ultimately like where a lot of people end up is like, why is it so hard to choose ourselves? It is so painful because it's vulnerable, because we're conditioned that women are, here to serve and love people and do things for them. And to choose ourselves feels counterintuitive and it feels wrong. Choosing ourselves and setting boundaries in this situation does not come without guilt. And I think that that's a misconception. It's like, oh, you did this. Like, how did you not feel guilty? How did you not feel bad? Listen, I have felt some form of guilt or like sadness or selfishness probably every day during this process. And even some days now, like I feel guilt that my kids have to go between houses and all of those things. But the more that you choose your worthiness and yourself in this process, like the more comfortable you get. If it's hard for you, like visualize yourself as like the inner child. People say all the time, would you talk to your best friend the way you talk to yourself? And those little like nuggets in my brain were like, gosh, I wouldn't want this marriage for my kids. I wouldn't want this situation for my best friend. Why is it so hard to choose myself? And it's just wildly uncomfortable and vulnerable. The thought that you can rest in is like, if you don't choose yourself and nobody else, and your person in marriage isn't choosing yourself and nobody else is choosing you, like what happens to you? Do you just simply wither away? Is this how it all ends? Is this what happens? Like, is this it? And I really felt like I deserve more. Like I started to see myself as valuable and worthy. And I want you guys to see yourself that way too. Like you are worthy and you deserve somebody that cherishes you and cares about your day and that knows your cheeseburger order. It's so valid and it's such a real thing when you actually find that person that meets that part of you and meets you where you are. It does exist and it is real and you shouldn't have to beg for it. And so some of those that was kind of ultimately what like pushed me over the edge to like making that decision and feeling good about it was like, wow, I matter. Like I get to do these things. Boys do it. Why can't I? Boys do it. I was like, I matter. Like I get to be me. And like if my cup is full and if I feel like if my needs are met, like I'm able to give so much more and meet so many more needs for people and exist from a happier, truer, more peaceful state. And I wanted my kids to see that. I wanted my kids to know like, this is my mom. This is who she is. She is happy and she's fulfilled and she chose herself instead of choosing everybody else in her life and for her to live in this mediocre situation. There is so much power in I don't know. Put one foot in front of the other. You don't have to make this decision today. You just have to continue to take the next right steps. And at some point you will hit a moment of clarity and you have your answer. Regardless of what you do in the situation, I encourage you to be gentle with yourself. This is not an easy process. It's time consuming and it's so painfully hard. But I believe in you. You can do it. Thanks for listening to The Summer of Me. You can listen to episodes on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube. Come hang out and follow my chaos on Instagram @Kendra for now. See you next time.